For decades, the Cowan family believed that Reginald Gordon Cowan had been a prisoner of war in a Japanese camp. It was one of those family facts that had been repeated for so long, no one really questioned it. Almost no one. Reginald's youngest grandson, Phil, had spent years turning that story over in his mind. Something about it didn't sit right. The dates seemed wrong. The war seemed wrong. The details didn't quite line up. But to find the truth, we have to look farther back than 1899, the year Reg was born, because the story of the Cowans in Plymouth doesn't start there. It starts in Scotland, in 1793. And here is where we meet the first in a long line of Williams. This William was one of 5 children born in 1776 to Hugh and Elizabeth Cowan. With little chance of inheriting land and limited prospects for financial security, he had to make his own way in the world. But he was young, hard-working, and skilled with his hands. While Ayrshire was developing, Gosport offered something even more appealing: steady, cash-paid employment driven by the demands of the Royal Navy. In 1793, Great Britain entered the French Revolutionary Wars, triggering massive naval expansion and an explosion of work along the south coast. For 17-year-old William, the choice was clear. He made the 450-mile journey to Gosport and found work as a builder, and it was there that he met Ruth Skidmore and fell madly in love. On July 20th, 1794, William and Ruth were married at the Holy Trinity Church, and almost immediately the couple welcomed the first of 7 children into their lives, a boy they named William Brown Cowan. William and Ruth's first child was born on April 1st, 1795. They named him William Brown Cowan. And yes, this is where the Cowan family begins its long and deeply unhelpful tradition of naming nearly every important man William. But William Brown Cowan is more than just another name on the tree. He is the first child of the English Cowan branch, and with him the paper trail becomes stronger. By the 1830s, William Brown had moved west to Tavistock, Devon. He was no longer the son of a young Scottish builder making his way in Gosport. He was a working man of his own right, a plasterer. He was married to a woman named Mary Mitchell, and in 1834 they were living on Exeter Street in Tavistock. There, on June 28, 1834, their son was baptized. His name was William Lucas Cowan, and he is the next William in the line that leads us, eventually, to Reg. For a young plasterer's family living on Exeter Street between 1830 and 1835, life in Tavistock was comfortable and secure. William, as a plasterer, was an elite artisan who directly benefited from the massive construction investments made by the town's landlord, the Duke of Bedford. In the early 1830s, Exeter Street was a respectable, stable, residential road located just uphill from the town centre. Living here meant that the family escaped the severe cramped overcrowding and poor sanitation hitting the miners' quarters down by the river. A plasterer's wage easily afforded a solid stone terrace cottage. The home likely featured a small private garden plot to grow vegetables, a luxury that kept the family well fed with fresh produce. Mary and the children could walk down the hill to the bustling centuries-old market. They bought fresh Devon butter, cheese, meats, and grains. The town was highly self-sufficient and vibrant with trade. This was the place that William Lucas called home, at least until 1856. By the time William Lucas reached adulthood, the family story had shifted again. He did not remain in Tavistock. Like the Williams before him, he moved toward opportunity. By 1856, he was living in East Stonehouse, near Plymouth, working as a carpenter. On June 28, 1856, exactly 22 years after his baptism, William Lucas Cowan married Sarah Ann Cornelius at the parish church of St. George, East Stonehouse. William was 22, Sarah Ann was 23. Together they had 4 children. William, because apparently the family had a theme, John, Jesse, and Albert. But life in East Stonehouse was not like life in Tavistock, where William Lucas had grown up. The family rented homes in a brick terrace tenement near the busy high-traffic hub of Lower Clarence Place, in what was very much a carpenter's neighborhood. It was dense and noisy. The air smelled of sea salt, coal smoke, horses, and hard work. Sarah Ann took in laundry to bring in a few extra pennies, while William worked his trade as a carpenter. But this was not the cleaner, more comfortable world of Exeter Street. In crowded port communities like East Stonehouse, outbreaks of scarlet fever, typhus, and cholera were frightening realities. Albert Ernest Cowan was born on June 9, 1873. By then, his older siblings were already well on their way to adulthood, and the Cowan family was preparing for another move. Once again, William Lucas packed up his life and followed the work, this time to Plymouth. The move to Plymouth seemed to have marked a turning point for the Cowan family. After years of movement, Ayrshire to Gosport, Gosport to Tavistock, Tavistock to East Stonehouse, Plymouth offered something different. It was still crowded, smoky, and busy, but it was also full of opportunity. This was a city built around work. The dockyards, the navy, shipping, trades, shops, warehouses, railways, and the growing machinery of public service. For William Lucas, a carpenter, Plymouth meant work. For Sarah Ann, it meant raising a family in a city that was difficult but alive with possibility. And for their youngest son, Albert, it meant something more. Albert grew up in a household shaped by skilled labor, discipline, and practical work. His father built with wood. His grandfather had worked with plaster. His great-grandfather had built his way from Scotland to Gosport. But Albert's path would be different. Albert did not spend his life moving from building site to building site. He entered the post office, one of the great engines of Victorian and Edwardian Britain. And as a young man, he began a family of his own. On October 6, 1894, Albert married Maria Westlake. Albert was 21, Maria was 22. Together, they had 7 children, and one of them was our Reg. At Pennycombe Quick, in Plymouth's sorting office, Albert became responsible for the stores department. It was not the sort of work that made headlines, but it was the sort of work that made everything else possible. For many years, Albert served the Plymouth Postal District, and when his long service was complete, he received the Imperial Service Medal, formal recognition of faithful, long-serving work. The Cowans had come a long way from Ayrshire. And finally, after more than a century of Cowans building, moving, working, adapting, and beginning again, we arrive at the name that started this whole search. Reginald Gordon Cowan. Born in East Stonehouse in 1899, Reg was the 4th child of Albert and Maria. He grew up in a busy Plymouth household, surrounded by the rhythm of postal work, naval life, family responsibility, and a city shaped by the sea. And for decades, the family story said that Reg had been a prisoner of war in a Japanese camp. But by now, we already know enough to ask the question Phil kept asking. Does that actually make sense? To answer that, we have to stop treating Reg as a family legend and start following him through the records, because Reginald's military story is not simple. He was young, too young. Like many boys of his generation, he wanted in before the paperwork said he was allowed in. He appears to have lied about his age to join up, and before the war was over, he had served under more than one regiment. So before we can answer the question of where he was held prisoner, we first have to answer something more basic. Who was Reg serving with? When was he serving? And which war are we actually talking about? And to answer that, we have to begin where Reg's military story begins. Not in Japan, not in the Second World War, but with a young Plymouth boy who was determined to serve, even if the paperwork said he was too young. The first document we looked at was this one. At first glance, it seemed simple enough, a military form with a name, a number, and a regiment. But this one page immediately changed the direction of the search. It gave us Reg's military identity on paper. Reginald Gordon Cowan, service number 27661, connected with the Dorset Regiment. And just as importantly, it gave us a date, 1918. And that mattered, because if Reg was being recorded as a prisoner of war in 1918, then we were not looking at the Second World War. We were not looking at Japan. We were looking at the First World War. The family story had remembered something real. Reg had been a prisoner of war. But this document was the first clear sign that part of the story had shifted over time. The war was wrong. The camp was wrong. But Reg being a prisoner, that part was true. The next document took us back to the beginning of Reg's military life and immediately raised another question. This service record is for Reginald Cowan, and near the top of it, it gives his date of birth, March 18th, 1895. But we know from the family records that Reginald was born in 1899. That is not a small clerical mistake. That's a 4-year difference. And in wartime, 4 years mattered. When Britain went to war in 1914, Reg was only about 15 years old, far too young to serve. But if he claimed to have been born in 1895, he suddenly became 19. Old enough to enlist, old enough to be accepted, old enough, at least on paper, to go to war. But this record also shows something else. Reg's military story did not stay in one neat box. He began with the Dorset Regiment, but later records show him moving to the Wiltshire Regiment. So before Reg ever became a prisoner, before the camp, before the family story, we already have 2 important clues. He appears to have made himself older than he really was, and his service path was more complicated than the family story remembered. The next document gave us the clearest sign that Reg's military path did not stay in one place. This is his medal index card. It records Reg as a private, serving first with the Dorset Regiment under service number 29989, and then with the Wiltshire Regiment under service number 27661. The second number matters, because 27661 is the same number that appears on the prisoner of war paperwork. So now the paper trail is starting to connect. Reg entered the records under altered details. He served with the Dorsetshire Regiment. He was later recorded with the Wiltshire Regiment, and the number attached to the Wiltshire Regiment is the number that follows him into captivity. And then finally, we found the document that proved it. This German prisoner of war record lists Reginald Cowan, private, 1st Wiltshire Regiment, service number 27661. It records him as having been captured at Messines on April 11th, 1918. He was listed as unwounded, and the location is unmistakable, West Front, the Western Front. This was the final piece of evidence we needed. At age 19, after 4 years of active service, Reg was officially a prisoner of war, captured by the Germans in 1918. The prisoner of war record proved Reg had been captured. The next piece of evidence proved he came home. Among the family records was the letter sent in the name of the king to returning prisoners of war, thanking Reg for his service and acknowledging what he had endured. It's a simple document, but an important one. Reg survived captivity. He returned to Plymouth, and then, like so many men after the war, he had to figure out how to live the rest of his life after it. After the war, Reg continued his public service. This time, like his father, in the post office. Steady, respectable work. And in the final months of 1920, he married Frances Smith, and together they had 5 children. Gordon, William, Albert, who's Phil's father, David, and Pauline. And until 1936, life was predictably normal. On October 6, 1936, at City Hospital in Plymouth, Frances died from tuberculosis meningitis. She was only 42 years old. According to her death certificate, Reg was present when she died. He had survived war, capture, and imprisonment, and now he was a widower with 5 children. On August 11, 1937, Reg remarried. Violet Standlake came into the family, and she became the grandmother Phil knew. It had only been 10 months since Frances had died, but Reg was a working father with 5 children. His household needed care, stability, and a way forward. And to be fair, there is no evidence that Reg and Violet did not truly love each other. Whatever the reasons, we know this was not a brief chapter. Reg and Violet stayed together for the rest of their lives. Reg died in Plymouth in early 1970. He was 70 years old. He had been a Plymouth boy, a soldier, a husband, a father, and a grandfather. And yes, he was the recipient of the King's letter.